Thank you very much for tuning in. We are doing a conversation all about QAnon. Now, that is a group you might have heard about in the news over the past couple of weeks. We want your questions, so do send them in. And we're going to be joined by Mark Andre Argentino, who's going to introduce himself in a few seconds. So, again, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Um, Hi, Mark Andre. How are you keeping?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for joining the conversation. So, first of all, can you introduce yourself in a few sentences? Tell us all about you.
Yes, so my name is Marc-Andre Argentino. I am a PhD candidate at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, in the departments of Engineering, Computer Science, and Theological Studies. And I research how extremist groups leverage technology and to create their propaganda, recruit members to their cause, and inspire individuals to acts of violence. And currently, my main group of interest is the QAnon movement.
So, we're going to start on one of the big questions many people have is who exactly or what is QAnon?
So QAnon is a conspiracy theory that emerged on the image board called 4chan. And it started with a single post on October 28th in 2017 that basically wanted to predict that Hillary Clinton would be arrested at 8:30 in the morning on October 30th, 2017. Obviously, Hillary Clinton was never arrested, but since then the movement has continued to grow and it has really hit the mainstream. And QAnon is what would be called a super conspiracy theory. It's an umbrella movement that really includes almost any type of conspiracy theory, as long as you hold to the central tenet, which is that there is a deep state satanic cabal of powerful individuals that are seeking to control the world. And Donald Trump is the only hope to protect us from this deep state cabal. And they're trying to make sure that he was not going to get elected, or now he's not going to get reelected. And any conspiracy theory that could feed into that, you're welcome on board. And this is part of what really makes it attractive.
And it sounds quite, obviously outlandish, but do you think it's moved from the fringe to the mainstream or is it still fringe? How would you categorize that?
Um, Probably still fringe, but it is becoming part of pop culture and it is getting more and more mainstream. It's fringe in the sense that though there appears to be a fair amount of individuals who are adhering to it, especially at a transnational level, a lot of Europeans are now participating in this conspiracy theory movement. It's still a little bit off for a lot of people. However, the pandemic has really provided a space where conspiracy theories could thrive, as well as influential people's promoting it. We've had the President of the United States retweet QAnon accounts 185 times now. We're up to 66 congressional candidates running for office in the United States in 15 different, in 27 different states, 15 of which are actually on the ballot in November. So 15 of them have a chance of being elected. And you have, Michael Flynn who's promoting them. You have some movie stars that are promoting them. It's just getting into this really weird space where people are noticing them a lot more than before. And when I started my PhD, I chose this as a quiet, fringe, weird movement that I would study, maybe do part of my PhD on. And I've actually changed my entire doctoral thesis to be on this movement in light of what's happened with the pandemic, the upcoming US election, and an increase in violence from the group. So it is getting to a point where it, it's going to be a bit more of an issue than it was a year and a half ago when I started researching them.
And so, for people over here in Europe, do you think that it's becoming more mainstream here, or do you think it's becoming a bigger conversation on the continent here too, just putting the US for aside for one moment?
It is growing, especially since the pandemic. One thing I've noticed doing the data analysis I do online, on Facebook, the biggest growth in QAnon groups have actually been in Europe. There's the content's now been translated in French, English, Italian, Spanish, Hungarian. There's a bunch of Scandinavian languages, Russian, Czech, and there's even a growing population in Japan and Korea. That's not only happening in Europe. So there is a lot of growth happening there, and the pandemic has definitely played a role. When you have such a monumental global event that provides economic, public health insecurities, there's a lot of stressors. There is a need to project those fears and anxieties towards a source of evil, and governments have not been consistent in providing answers, which is normal. We have an ever evolving public health threat that we had never dealt with before, and answers are going to change, but that creates a sense of insecurity in a wider population. And conspiracy theories provide a big overarching enemy that you could project this fear on and project an explanation to why this is happening to you. And this is how this is really, useful to a lot of people in this time of crisis.
And do you think that QAnon has any relationship to, I know we touched on this before, but to politics or to the political sphere, with regards to would they see themselves on the left wing side of politics, right wing side of politics, or is it just an apolitical thing that is happening on social media?
It's very political, and the political element will depend on the country you're in. In Canada and the US, there's a close relationship between both our countries, so there's going to be an overlap more on the conservative/Republican side of the sphere. When we're looking in Europe, it depends. In France, for example, QAnon really started with the Yellow Vest movement, which is similar to how it started in Quebec. The proximities between both societies brought that to those elements. In Germany, they had a very close relationship with the AfD. And around the election time in Germany is where they started picking up with conspiracy theories as a way of providing alternative reasonings to some political elements that were happening in Germany at the time. We've seen a huge growth in Italy tied to Five Star Party, Five Star Movement. Spain has seen huge growth, Poland as well, Hungary. One thing that's consistent is populistic movements that are taking place in there. You see either wide protests or a counterculture movement that is very attractive to these type of groups. This is how they could start, growing. That's the kind of seed that really started them
So
as
if
things
you're
get worse.
if you're
But
just tuning in now, Mark Andre Argentino is joining us here talking about QAnon. So send in your questions. So yeah, you're touching on this as well with regards to the political side of this. So much of this happening obviously on social media across numerous platforms. But do you think there's a real world consequence to these? And also, why have they been so much in the spotlight with regards to our news cycle right now?
for the real world consequences, I think we have to highlight prior to the pandemic, the consequences were mostly criminal in a way. We've had so far a kidnapping related to QAnon, arson, there's been graffiti, but there's also been murder charges. There's also been violent crimes related either to attempted violence, whether people come up armed at locations trying to figure out where these children that are being sacrificed to God. There's one individual who's being charged with uttering terroristic threats in the United States. And it's a growing element also where individuals are moving offline to take actions. If it's just something as simple as attacking a rack of masks at Target because you think masks are part of a way for the government to control you, or someone going on a car ride with his 5 kids in the back driving 110 miles an hour on the highway, and his wife had to jump out of the car to try to save herself and get the police to stop him. There are real world consequences where this could lead individuals to actions. It's very small at the moment, but it will get worse, at least from the violent side. There is a real world consequence for public health. QAnon has spread a lot of misinformation about vaccines, masks, is the virus real or not, alternative cures to the virus. That could have real impacts on individuals' health. And now with elections coming on, there's a question, are they going to be a threat to democratic institutions if it's a group that's very volatile and very easy to leverage to spread propaganda? We've seen them get organized and create hoax and spread disinformation. This could be a potential vector for state actors to maybe use this as to meddle in someone's election. So all these things are potential offline actions that could take place. But again, these are all potentials, right? It's hard to predict, but these are all potential outcomes.
So one of the questions we have here, it's from a user called Raxodi, and he says QAnon is a conspiracy theory designed to herd the masses that are starting to realize how corrupt our politicians are. So do you think, echoing that kind of sentiment, this comes from a place of, grievances with regards to political systems?
Grievances play a role. QAnon, similar to any ideology, really serves the function of answering questions related to evil. And government corruption is one of those elements that could be there. Most of it is a fictitious perceived corruption. There's always going to be issues no matter what political system you're in. There's nothing that's perfect. However, the type of global child satanic pedophile rings type of corruption is not something that's realistic.
Mm,
If it was based around monetary corruption or political corruption or things that we would normally see politicians do around the globe,
Hmm.
it would have a more of a grasp on reality. However, a lot of the questions that they're bringing up as the type of corruption they're perceiving is very difficult to believe in. However, often it is rooted in these types of, there's a grain of truth in every conspiracy theory. However, it's always blown out of proportion, and this is where it gets in this weird and silly space.
And so, you said before how it began, but let's just take a step back as well and look at we've had so-called Pizzagate, and then we had, the Wayfair conspiracy theory. So if you're watching, you mightn't have heard of these, but they did really burst onto social media. So can you walk us through with regards to these conspiracy theories, just a little bit about them? They have been widely debunked now, but questioning as to why they're still on social media. They still seem to be reverberating despite widespread debunks with regards to them.
Pizzagate emerged in a very volatile socio-political environment. It was, your 2015, 2016, you already have a civil rights movement in the US with the Black Lives Matter movement. Based on existing evidence, there was interference from foreign state actors in that political environment, combined with a large growth of websites specialized in the peddling of fake news and disinformation. This socio-political frenzy, combined with leaked emails off of WikiLeaks, basically compelled many individuals to embrace outrageous and unsubstantiated claims about conspiracy theories around Hillary Clinton. And the biggest one was this Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which alleged coded words and satanic symbols in the hacked emails from John Podesta pointed to a secret sex trafficking ring at this pizza shop. And even though it's been debunked, there is so much content online that you're never going to be able to remove, and there is no way to prove a negative. There is always going to be conspiracy theorists that are going to believe in this. It's the same thing with things like 9/11 or UFOs, or even going back to the 80s, you still have people talk about black helicopters and Roswell. Because you can't prove a negative, conspiracy theories will always have this impact on people, and they could always go back to it. It doesn't matter how much evidence or logic you throw at some of these problems.
And I guess when you're talking about the 1980s to now, the difference is, the social media platforms that allow these things to get amplified. And Twitter made a move this week with regards to specifically QAnon. So can you walk us through what that move Twitter made and what you think the ramifications of that move will be?
Twitter decided that they were going to limit the reach of QAnon on the platform. That's the first and most important thing that they're doing. They also mentioned that they have banned 7,000 accounts from the movement. This is because they were already violating existing terms of service against cyberbullying and brigading online. Basically, those that went into individuals' comments or profiles and started bombarding them with comment. So what Twitter basically said, however, is they are going to enforce existing policies. However, they chose to enforce them clearly on QAnon.
Hmm.
It's not; these are not necessarily new tools. However, there is one thing that is new, and I'm trying to find exactly what they said.
Hmm.
It's where is their tweet? It's coordinated violence. Where's the
Um, I'll have a look at that too. Um,
because I don't want to lie on the live stream. But
um,
there's one too. It's coordinated harmful activity.
mhm,
What they did there is they combined two specific policies. They have one for coordinated inauthentic behavior. It's the language the platforms use to talk about foreign interference or manipulation of the social platforms by actors to achieve a political goal. This is usually they use it in that context. Harmful activity is where they already have regulations related to violence, extremism, and hate speech. What they're combining is the type of mobbing you'll see from QAnon accounts towards specific individuals. And I think the most popular example is Chrissy Teigen, who since 2017 has been part of this wider conspiracy theory. And QAnon act individuals have regularly gone to her profile
mm.
and decided to bombard her.
And she's been speaking
There's
out about that now as well.
she
Yeah.
she has been very vocal. I think she's had enough, which is understandable when you're
Mm.
continuously harassed. There's still a lot of questions around how they're going to enforce this because there's a difference between an individual actively going and harassing and putting hateful comments. But the way platforms work, there is still a recommendation element. So if Chrissy Teigen is trending and you go to her post and you see people saying like pedophilia is bad and stop eating babies, if you go and you
Yeah.
write pedophilia is bad, yes, you're joining the mob, but
Mm.
how do you determine if someone is legitimately a QAnon adherent versus potentially one of thousands that are just kind of joining on the party in a way? Now, there are existing terms of service that they could enforce, but it does raise some questions. And
Yeah.
especially, I think it gets weirder when they're talking about not serving contents associated to QAnon and trends. I think that's all right. You don't need to get QAnon hashtags trending. They could hijack anything else. What I find interesting is they're going to limit the reach of QAnon content in the search functionalities and the recommendation algorithm. And the
Mm.
only eyebrows I get raised around that is specifically around the question of the candidates that are running for office that are
Mm.
using QAnon as a platform. Now, I'm not a fan of QAnon at all, but when it comes to democratic institutions, we do have systems in play that have to be respected for democracy to work. And to that end, if someone is campaigning on a QAnon platform and that platform is no longer available to them, it does reduce their chance of getting elected versus an opponent. Now, I
Mm.
know it's semantics. I know it seems weird if you're talking about a group that has a potential extremism threat.
Mm.
However, there are tools in democratic process to make sure that such an individual does not win. So it does raise questions around there. Twitter did say they're not going to take action against
Mhm.
congressional candidates that support QAnon, so they're still going to have a platform.
Mm.
However, if you remove their entire base, it does cause some issues. I know some people are not necessarily going to see that as a problem, but as
Yeah.
someone who tries to look at this in a holistic way and try to get both sides of the puzzles, I think it is an important question we have to have because it does set a precedent for other type of groups or actors that may come into this space that may not be a QAnon. So it does give something that Twitter could go back to in the future and say, well, like QAnon group X, Y, and Z in 2021,
Mm.
2022, whatever, have done similar things, and we're going to limit them. And the slippery slope or the repercussions of that could be very hard to determine in the future, but they could be there. And it really takes a long term approach to consider what this may be.
And I guess this kind of touches on one question we've had in the chat, or one comment that says that this is censorship at its finest. So, where is the line then between a social media platform taking action against a group that, has, for example, targeted people baselessly, like Hillary Clinton, Chrissy Teigen, even Tom Hanks has been drawn into this conspiracy theory. So, where's the line between that and protecting the users, and then people saying that this is censorship at its finest? Do you think that this is a really difficult question to answer, or do you think that platforms can have an answer to that?
I don't think it's censorship at its finest. Right now, the accounts that have been banned in the QAnon movement, the larger ones, are those that have already evaded Twitter ban. So it's
Mm.
individuals who have been banned in the past and have come back.
Hmm.
The other influencers are still there.
Mm.
QAnon hasn't said they're going to ban people for tweeting about QAnon. They're
Mm.
going to ban people who are violating their terms of service, which is what everyone agrees on when you create an account on Twitter,
Mm.
whether it's real or fake.
Yeah.
Now, what they're doing, people may call censorship, is limiting the search functionality and limiting the trending capacity. This doesn't necessarily count as a full censorship. You're basically
Mm.
taking a spider and ripping off all its legs. The spider's still alive, it just can't really do much.
Mm.
So you're giving every QAnon individual, you have the right to say what you want. You have the right to put whatever content you want. Your content's never going to get trending. That doesn't mean that you're not able to have your voice heard. Trending is just a feature for community building on Twitter for people to come and congregate around a specific topic.
Mm.
If your topic is toxic, that you're getting into the debate of where your freedom of expression begins and my freedom of expression ends. So
And
it really gets in that space, but
yeah.
you're allowed to say what you want and you're allowed to do what you want. The platform's just not going to give you the capacity to spread it wide, and it's not going to let you manipulate its algorithm to bring in new people into your group. So if you want to do that, you're going to have to actively reach out and bring people in. So
But would you say then, so with regards to Twitter taking that first step, do you think this is the first step that platforms have taken? I've seen Reddit had previously made a step. What about, TikTok, Facebook? What's next for QAnon? With regards to their space on social media platforms, do you think there's going to be repercussions for this with regards to Twitter? Is this going to make a big difference even?
I don't know if it's going to make a big difference.
Mm.
Now, Reddit has done a bigger approach back in 2018. They outright outright banned 80 like the whole sub that had 90,000 people in it. And they banned two subs. So there's Calm Before the Storm and then there was the Great Awakening. So they banned QAnon on Reddit twice.
Mm.
Twitter is still it's in this weird space. We don't know how they're going to apply this new coordinated harmful activity rule that they put on, right? We don't know how they're going to enforce it. We don't know what's going to go there. It's going to take time to see, one, how they roll it out, and what are the impact of this going to be. It's a really more, we could probably talk about this in 6 months to try to get an idea of what it looks like. I think then we're going to have a short-term idea,
Mm,
and probably 12 months, 18 months down the road, we'll have a better long-term idea of how they apply after they maybe use this on a couple of other groups.
mm,
TikTok has just gone down the censorship route. When Pizzagate and Pedogate were trending, which are the hashtags you use in
mm,
communally for the whole conspiracy theory, they
yeah.
just banned it. There's no like all if you search, you can't search Pizzagate, you can't search Pedogate on TikTok. The QAnon hashtags are there. It could be a next platform for QAnon. However, it's still very small. The biggest hashtag, where we go one, we go all, has 112 million views.
Mm,
Yesterday, when I was looking at the trending hashtags on TikTok, the smallest trending hashtag had 355 million views. The
mm,
largest one had 11 billion views. So QAnon is really a drop in the bucket in the TikTok ecosystem.
mm,
There's potential to grow, but I think the platform, since it's probably more rooted in its Chinese approach to censorship, it's really
mm,
just going to drop a ban hammer and just get going. All here, TikTok, you're going to take no
yeah.
QAnon hashtag, bam, bam, bam. That's going to be their approach. There
Mm,
was Ben Collin. There was Donnie O'Sullivan from CNN yesterday announced that Facebook was considering to do something similar with QAnon. We haven't seen what that is yet. We don't know what
mm,
their approach is going to be. Facebook is a different platform than Twitter, so I'm not sure if they're going to start banning groups or users. There's already a limiting functionality in the search
mm,
engine for Facebook when it comes to QAnon.
mm,
So we're going to see how they take the next step. But if Facebook is taken off, Twitter's taken off, they've already talked about recently. Influencers have said they're either going to Gab or Parlay. Parlay being the biggest one. Gab is kind of their backup. A couple have said they're going to go to WeGo Social,
mm,
but ultimately, I think though this may be their short-term solutions, I think the long-run solution might be going back to Telegram,
mhm,
where there's already a transnational community. That's where QAnon Europe is mostly located, is on the Telegram platform.
mhm,
um, you provide, influencers could create channels where they could put up all their trash, toxic news they want, and then you could have chats where the communities could actually interact. I
mhm,
think that would be how they would sustain it. I really hope they don't go that route, to say, mainly because there's also a large far right community, far right extremist community on Telegram, and the potential overlap between
mm,
QAnon and more extremist groups is a terrifying
mhm.
concept.
And so for people who might be aware, of Telegram, just what exactly is Telegram? And with regards to your work on extremism, what have you seen? And I'm going to loop this question in as well with regards to kind of our audience here. And a broader question is, should Europe be worried about these kind of conspiracy theories that are seeming to bubble right now on platforms like Telegram?
Telegram is a messaging application that provides end-to-end encryption if you're having a peer-to-peer conversation. However, it does offer this large channel or chat function. So channel, you could just create a news stream. So, CNN, BBC had some news channels where you could just put your regular stories in and people consume it. And there's large chat functionalities that could have a couple 100,000 people based on the size of the QAnon ones now,
Hmm.
that you could have conversations with, and you to get this back and forth communally. It provides a sense of anonymity and of protection because a lot of people think it's encrypted, but public channels are just public. It is, however, a very important application when it comes to extremist communities. ISIS used it previously to communicate back in 2016 to 2018. And now there's a lot of white power movements, neo Nazis, accelerationists, far right people.
Hmm.
Generally, people who've been kicked off most social media platforms end up congregating there to share their content because Telegram does not censor a lot of content on the platform. So it is a very thriving community. It does play an important role internationally. We've seen it used, let's say, in Iran to support their elections. We've seen other people use it to communicate in authoritarian regimes. So
Mm,
it's not also just a bash on Telegram. It does play an important role in other
mm,
contexts, as does other encrypted communication devices. But when it comes to research and extremism, it also plays a central role when it comes to finding and consuming this type of content.
mm,
Now, when it comes to the question about should Europe be concerned, it's a delicate balance, yes and no. At
mm,
its heart, QAnon is mostly harmless but toxic in the sense that For them, it's really about this massive information war, and they're these digital soldiers, and memes and posts and decoding Q drops is their weapons of war. So a lot of them are harmless, though there is all this potential for a lot of harm, whether it's cyberbullying or, as I was saying before, national security, public health, and democratic institutions. These are all things you need to keep in mind. QAnon Germany would be the one I would probably raise a few more eyebrows about, mainly because they're very closely tied to the AFD. And on Telegram, there's a lot, or not a lot, but there's a growing overlap between QAnon Germany and some of the more neo-Nazi Telegram channels, which should raise a lot of red flags.
Mhm.
Still a nascent thing that's growing, but considering how they're already riffing off the AFD, it's not something that I think is fantastic. Outside of that, it's a toxic group. There's a lot of toxic groups online, so it's a problem in that sense. Though I think there are a lot more dangerous groups or potential more dangerous movements across Europe and the world than QAnon. It's more at the stage where I still think we need to educate people about them and raise awareness and highlight that they are a potential threat. And it's more about doing research right now to prepare the tools and get them ready to, whether it comes, de-escalate individuals, de-radicalize them, or at least be aware of where some potential threats may be if something happens, and not, miss some type of profiling element if there is a violent act, or if we want to make educational material about vaccines or about wearing masks, to be aware that there is this conspiratorial group online. It's more to provide that type of awareness. I think that's where more of the threat is right now.
And I guess this is just one question that's come in that kind of links to your answer there. But somebody said that, and when it comes to QAnon, a lot of it that we've seen here in the Cube is people that want other people to go and do their own so-called research about the conspiracy theory. So somebody says here that QAnon allows people to think for themselves. How is this extremism? So I think that's a good question for you to answer with regards to you're studying all about extremism. So could you answer this person's question with regards to that?
There's a couple of QAnon supporters in the chat. I like this. This is fun.
I think so,
Um,
yeah.
so QAnon encourages quote unquote research. What this means is they replicate source citation, and they try to emulate academic research. They try to recreate a methodological approach to analysis. However, it's it's not about evidence for QAnon. It's about faith. It's really about holding the lines. You need to believe what the central line of the movement is, and you need to understand that whatever anyone outside of the Q movement says is going to be misinformation. Everyone else is wrong. And Tom Nicholson wrote this fantastic book called The Death of Expertise. And it kind of talks about how Google and algorithms are going to create these type of issues where everyone is a Google expert, everyone is a doctor because you could find the answers. And then we have algorithmic biases. One of the experiments I like to do is I'll create a new Windows system on a virtual machine, and I'll create a whole new series of accounts. And I try to look at how long it takes for me to be completely algorithmically biased against a group I'm looking at. So if you go on, you create a QAnon VM, it took me 7 days to get nothing but that. It biased my Google algorithm, my YouTube algorithm.
Mhm,
On Twitter, I had a sock puppet that had gained 1,000 followers within 5 days. I
mhm,
had all my Facebook groups. So everything I was consuming was related to that. So when you went to search on Google, let's say I wanted to search about vaccines, if my bias is towards, QAnon, or if I look on YouTube, you may get tidbits of information from reliable sources, but your mentality as someone who consumes conspiracy theories is going to be those resources are false, and you're going to turn to your quote unquote experts.
mhm,
However, there has been many people who have debunked and provided evidence, and it's not about evidence. It never is going to be about evidence. It's
mhm,
it's not about secular evidence. It's about faith. That's kind of what I've put in my recent chapter. It's really about believing in the prophetic elements of Q, and then believing in the community's capacity to quote unquote research. And it's really just trying to find similar confirmation biases. If you throw spaghetti at a wall for a long enough time, you're going to paint this weird picture and you're going to try to connect the dots. However, you're not necessarily going to find a proper result. And this is what's happening here. Is that part of a lack in media literacy? Probably,
Mm.
but I think there's other issues there, especially when it comes to algorithmic biases.
And this, I'm going to end on this question too. So this is a question in from Vadim, and he says, "I think it's time to moderate the internet." He says misinformation must be banned right away with regards to keyword texts. Now, I think that that might be difficult, but do you think that it's time for platforms to take a stronger approach? Our conversation just comes a day after Twitter's done so, uh, and with regards to moderating, is that a difficult conversation to be had?
It's a difficult conversation to be had because I don't think platforms should make the final decision on this, nor do I think it's governments. This is a multi-sectoral problem, and we need to take a multi-sectoral issue. Because if the platforms decide what is and what is not free speech, what is and what is not disinformation, you're giving private companies the power to determine what is the truth and what we can and cannot say.
Mm-hmm,
On the flip side, if it's only a government that does that, I don't think I would trust any government or elected officials alone to make the decision to determine what is and what is not truth and what is not um, what is and what are we allowed to say or not. I think those are issues. It takes civil society, it takes governments, it takes platforms, and we need to get people around the table to talk about this. And I don't think moderating and censoring the internet is the issue either. I think I'm a very large proponent of free speech,
mm-hmm,
and you want to spew your toxic content, if you're really not causing any harm and you're not breaking any terms of service,
mm-hmm,
fill your boots. I think what we need to do is provide a better system of support, better media literacy, educating people about how to do this. There's enough studies that go out there to show if you A, do not read just the headline but the entire article, or
mm-hmm,
B, spend a couple of times just reading information from another source, like having a healthy media diet. It doesn't
mm-hmm,
matter if you're conservative or liberal. If you're not reading the same story from a couple of different sources, you're going to have biases. Every publication has a specific framing they want to present information as. It's their brand. You need to understand that you need to take that, interpret it, and get a wider idea of it. It's just not one story, one result. And people have just gotten lazy because the internet provides you such a powerful tool to gather this information. They do not want to take the extra steps it takes to actually find the answers they need. The amount of times I've had QAnon individuals look at a story I've written and then start crapping on me and going, well, here, paragraph, here's a screenshot, I answer your question, screenshot, I answer that. And then they don't have any answers because they just didn't read. They just looked at the title and they just got angry and went there. And we do the same thing ourselves when we'll look at this, you know, rage inducing title or this happiness inducing title, and we're just going to react. And I think if I could put one drop of wisdom is if something makes you feel extremely happy or extremely sad when it comes to reading, consuming media, don't trust it and do a little research to find out what it means. Because basically the piece is trying to trigger an emotional reaction in you. And news should not be emotional, it should be neutral, providing facts.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark Andre
Oh,
Argentino.
thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
very much. And thank you everyone for watching and tuning in. We hope that we answered many of those questions for you, and best of luck. Great speaking to you.